Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek radio-controlled early production German Tiger 1. Since the last video, a lot of progress has been made to the tank, specifically the completion of the tank's fifel system, as well as the fabrication of the tank's turret. We'll be going over all of these additions and modifications in this video. With the majority of the hull now out of the way, the last area to focus on this build has to do with the turret. And when it comes to the turret, the first thing I need to do is to assemble the turret's main casing. Starting left to right, the very first piece this brings us to is the main turret armor sides itself. This is one complete piece of aluminum, and it is pre-bent to the shape of the Tiger 1's turret. From there, this takes us to the front plate, which would be located in this section here, and this is actually what will eventually hold up the mantlet and the gun system. It's made from a, again, CNC'd aluminum alloy, and is pre-cut to fit into its proper location. We have here these two roof sections, which on the Tiger 1 are noteworthy to be in the front sections over here. They consist of a piece of laser cut aluminum plate and a very thin piece of laser cut sheet steel. Moving on, takes us to the main roof, which consists of a single piece of laser cut aluminum alloy plate that has its pre-bent angle present. Moving towards the right hand side takes us to the main floor plate of the turret. It's a very thick bit of machining. Again, CNC'd aluminum alloy. It has some lightning cuts added to a few locations, but overall the piece is still a very hefty unit. From there takes us to the rear lift lug, which acts also as a fastener to hold on to these little blocks. These blocks here actually are going to be mounted to the inner portion of the turret and are what the kit is intended to use to support the turret roof onto the vehicle, or I should say onto the turret casing itself. The final bag are some wing nuts, and these wing nuts are actually going to be used to fasten and secure the turret to the top deck, which I'll be going over shortly after the filming of this scene here, and will be discussed more in depth throughout the rest of the video. Now, with the media and method that is used to construct this turret here, this is something that is seen on Armortek kits from the mid-2000s period and onward till today. On the first two generations of Armortek kits, the turret designs were much different. Rather than utilizing independent pieces of aluminum alloy plate, the bottom pan and the entire armor sides were integrally casted as one aluminum casting. If anyone's interested in exactly what this layout looked like, on my vintage Armortek Tiger 1 build video series that I've done, I go into more detail and you can see the turret in more depth and exactly how it assembles compared to this more recent rendering. Having said that, what's unique about this type of construction method is that this is actually very true to form to the real Tiger 1. On the real Tiger 1, the turret was assembled in very much the same format. The armor sides of this giant horseshoe-shaped section over here was one giant piece of rolled armored steel plate, which kind of baffles the mind on exactly what type of tooling was required in order to get this type of a shape with this size of scale and thickness on the real vehicle. Now, as an interesting side note, there's this really cool photograph that was taken at the very end of the war when the Allies captured a bombed-out foundry that made the turrets for the German tanks. You have two mouse turrets side by side, and bridging the gap in between are a row of these Tiger 1 horseshoe formings. It's one of those images that's really, really cool if you ever see it. Hopefully I'll be able to insert it into the video to get a good idea on just how big the turret for the mouse really are compared to the giant turrets for the Tiger 1 in its own right. Anyway, now I'm deviating too much. Let's get back to the model. Now moving on to the bottom section of the turret. Like I said before, there are some lightning cuts that are added to lighten the weight of the turret somewhat. However, the real difference that separates this turret here from the other incarnations of the Armortek kit, even the ones, by the way, with the same type of turret construction, has to do with the bottom section. This is where the Tiger 131 kits from Armortek are different compared to the other units. Now, like what was mentioned in the last video update, the turret secures to the top deck via a number of fasteners. There are some threaded rods that protrude from the turret rotating bushing, and then they would slip into these sections over here, which will then allow you to fasten them into place on the opposite side. Now on the model here, they utilize wing nuts for this application because this allows you to secure the turret to the model securely, but it gives you access to remove them if necessary, which, by the way, is a very nice feature to have. Now, on the older versions of the kit that did not utilize this ball bearing system and utilize the older brass bushing system, the turret would need to have a neck which would descend from this section over here, and this is where you would have some spacers and a large rotational steel ring that was geared and tooth cut, which would then slide into place, and that would facilitate for the turret turning function. On this model here, it's a totally different animal. Now, one feature that Armortek designed into this piece that I actually really like has to do with these cutouts that we have here. If you notice, there are these unique cutouts where the fastener holes go. The purpose of these have to do for clearance of the nuts that are found on the securing fastener. Like what was showcased in the last video, the turret rotation ball bearing utilizes several spacers as well as the geared tooth ring, and that is held in place by very long bolts. Those bolts are anchored to the ball bearing ring via some nuts, and I added some washers, and because of that, you need to have these clearances here for the turret to slide on and not make contact with these type of equipment. I've test fit this section onto the turret ring that I've assembled, and it fits absolutely perfectly. No mods need to be made to this section in whatsoever way, shape, or form. And here's the turret going through its fabrication. The very first piece that needs to be mounted is the front bulkhead. Now, this locks into place via these two puzzle sections that we have here. Now, these keying notch systems do work and are also present on the real unit, by the way. But on the model here, a little bit of hand fitting is going to be needed in order to really get the piece to slide in with very little effort. This was done either with a file or a Dremel with a sanding drum can also be used to loosen up the tolerances slightly so that the pieces, again, lock into place. The next bit of tooling that is going to be absolutely required, and if you don't have it, you're basically going to be up the creek without a paddle, is you need a really good and firmly mounted shop vise. The turret needs to be pried open so that the piece can slip into place. And to do this, I took the entire turret side armor casing and locked it in my vise. Now, the vise here is not clamped into a point where it's overly tight. You just want to have it secure enough so that it keeps everything firmly in place, but not too torqued down in that it'll cause marring and also can even damage the curvature of the turret armor side. So some discretion is going to need to be exhibited by the builder. With the piece locked into place, I grabbed this section over here, literally pulled it open, and the section just clipped into place. Now, regrettably, I did not get it on footage or on film, so that is forever going to be lost in time. But the piece, I just took the front armor plate, lined it up into the two grooves, and then pulled it, and the piece just sucked right in. Now, this is one portion of the front armor plate that I have to stress that you cannot screw up, because if you do, you're going to be in big trouble. Has to do with the orientation here of this front armor plate. Let me go back around here so you get exactly an idea of what I'm referring to. Now, here on the rear section, you can see exactly why the orientation needs to be kept in mind by the builder, and you have to really stay on the ball with this one. If you look on the bulkhead, on this section here, there's a milled away cutout with two tapped holes. This here is for the top deck to lock into place. The reason why I have to stress this out is because this plate here can be fitted either upside down or reversed in a bunch of different ways in which you're not going to have this groove in its correct location. If this happens, well,
you done fucked up, you know that, don't you?
Because the only way to get that off is you're going to have to pry this turret side open again in order to remove the plate and to get it back onto its proper orientation. More easily said than done in that case. And again, the best way to do this is to really pay attention and you get this right on the first try. Once the piece is clipped into place, a little tapping on either side of the hammer is going to seat it in a much more thorough manner. Now, to do this, I actually went ahead and repositioned the turret siding on the vise, and I clamped it down on the straightaway sections that are found on the front section of the Tiger 1 turret. This was just to give it a little bit more support during the type of hammering I was going to be doing to the part. I didn't want to have this type of reverberations go into the rounded section where it was clamped into the turret, because that could possibly, again, cause damage to the curvature, which I want to avoid at all costs. Once that's done, I can now mount on the bottom portion of the turret, and this is just done with some fasteners. And here's the turret now fully assembled. Once the bottom pan went into place, fasteners were then added via the kit supplied locations, and the entire unit just basically came into place. Now, on this section over here, one of the fasteners was stripped out. However, he was able to still get into place and hold the panel where it needs to be. This little piece of fastener head that sticks up above the surface is going to be deleted and ground down, and then any remnants are going to be sanded away with the bodywork. You'll also see I do have some tooling marks here from some of the places where I was hitting it with a hammer in order to help contort it into place. These two will also be blended away nice and smooth once the bodywork commences. Same is also true to a certain extent on the opposite side in regards to the tool marks, as well as also on the back where I had it in the vise. From this step here, I can now progress with getting the top roof fabricated up, and then that will allow me to then work on the magnet locking system. Now, also on the inside, you'll notice I went ahead and mounted the turret mounting lugs. The ones on the sides are mounted on permanently. The one in the back is held on temporarily at the moment because I am going to be adding a little bit of detailing to this section over here, which is absent on the Armortek kit. More information on that is to follow. From the turret sides, this now brings us to the turret roof. Now, the component that you see here is now fully assembled, and this is exactly how the kit is designed to be built. If we recall, we have the top deck, the front plate, and a mounting strap. Now, this is all assembled out of box with no mods really needing to be made. Now, one thing that I neglected to mention was that when these Armortek kits were first developed, the top deck here was made from a single piece of laser cut steel, and it was also pre-bent. The piece was literally one component, and this other little piece that we have here in the front was not present, and this was integrally found onto the plate. This meant that when you were building the tank and you wanted to add the welds, you had to simulate this little piece from being separate via the weld beads. Now, the weld beads are still going to be added to this section over here, but one thing that this does do is that now that the piece is 3 pieces, this should give you a great idea on where to put the weld beads, and you're not going to have to take any guesses in where the pieces got to go. So in that regard, this over here is a good idea. Now, from this point here, I'm going to do a little bit of hand fitting on some of the sections in order to have it fit properly onto the turret side component that I showed before. Once the roof plates are assembled, it is then time to get the turret roof to properly fit onto the sides of the turret casing. Now, right now, the turret is actually going through its modification procedure. If I remove the turret, you can see that I went ahead and mounted on those mounting lugs that I mentioned before. Like I said before, there are 3 lugs that secure the roof to the turret, and on the way the kit is designed, the turret roof gets bolted permanently to these 3 sections. However, on the model here, I'm not going to be utilizing this system, and I'm going to be changing this out for the magnet system, which is generally a procedure that I add on these 1/6 scale Armortek builds. Now, the lugs have been mounted to the model as per the kit, and what these lugs do, even though they're not going to be utilized with that of a fastener, but they give me a good base to put the turret roof on, and it gives me the correct height. Once the pieces are fitted on, I can go ahead and go through the modification for mounting on the magnets. Now, if you'll notice on the top portion here, I marked several sections with blue Sharpie. The purpose of this is to give me an idea of where the magnet plates are going to be affixed. Keep in mind, the roof is made from aluminum alloy, so you cannot just have a magnet bolted to the side of the turret and expect it to stick to the roof. Obviously, aluminum is not magnetic. So to do that, what I went ahead and did was I marked these sections, and with the little steel plate that comes with the cabinet magnet sets, I went ahead and secured it to the roof. Now right now everything is still temporary because I'm still going through their mounting procedure. Basically, once I affix the magnets to the roof, I then temporarily put them in their place, slide the roof onto the sides, and then with a Sharpie I can go on the inside and mark where the holes on the sides of the turret are going to go in order to secure the cabinet magnet firmly in place. Once all the holes are drilled out, I can then go ahead and get the roof and the turret bottom into primer. Now, these plates, like I said before, are mounted on right now as a temporary measure. Soon as all the holes are drilled out, I'm going to remove the plates, get everything into paint, and then firmly attach them once the primer work is all done. Now, the sides have all been marked, and one advantage about the Tiger 1 is that because of the sheer size of the turret casing, it gives me more than enough room to fit a drill in here with a bit in order to drill out all of these sections. And here's the turret now mounted to the model. However, even though the turret is held on without its wing nuts at the moment, the turret can still fully rotate with the radio and with the RC equipment. Of course, to test that, I'm going to turn on the radio and turn on the tank. With that high-pitched beep, that means everything is macroed in, and the turret can rotate. Now, this is the first time that the turret rotation system is actually being tested with the weight of the turret. What was showcased in a last video was the turret rotation ring rotating, and it did rotate in a nice, very smooth manner, but without the weight of the turret, it was really half of the test that was being done. With the turret mounted, you can see exactly how smooth these turret systems really are. Also, really quick, one little change I am going to have to do has to do with this little tool post that we have here. Note with the way the Tiger 1's turret is shaped, if I try to rotate it any further, it is going to make contact with this little piece of equipment here, thus breaking it. So this is going to have to be slightly changed in order for the turret to rotate completely freely. However, other than that little piece inhibiting it, you can see that the turret spins absolutely freely. Now, it can also make contact here with the S-mine on the corner. This is not a mistake, and it's actually, unfortunately, as per the real vehicle. Which is why, if you are working on one of these early production Tiger 1s, you have to keep in mind of this S-mine that's here on the deck. You can easily not think it and crack that piece off. Which, again, is another reason why these were not very common after the Tiger 1s went into further development. Now, with the main turret fabrication out of the way, I now turn my attention back to the tank's fifel system in order to get it finished off and finally mounted to the vehicle. Now, the fifel system canisters themselves, I mentioned in a video or two a little while back, and there I go over this kit components and what was needed to be made to them to get them up to the way you see them here. Now, since the previous time these were on screen, their final assembly has been completed and they are now ready for their next steps. What was done to them as a quick recap was the pieces were assembled out of the box, and some of the kit modifications that I made were to the bottom two caps that we have here. These two are resin units that I have on the ECA catalog for a different set, but they were repurposed for the use of the bottom fifel canister caps that we have here. I add another small eyelet, as long as a few other eyelets to connect all the chain work, which will be done after the model is painted. Also, the main modification I made had to do with the fifel funnels that we have here, or I should say the elbows. Now, like I frequently mention on Tiger 1 videos, the fifel system has always been one of those portions of detailing on an early Tiger 1 that it really is a pain in the ass. When it comes time for maintenance or even just access to the rear section, dealing with these things are definitely a headache. So much so that the Germans themselves pitched them for probably the exact same reasons. Now, if the tank is radio controlled, you do have to make these sections here somehow disengage to get access to the inside portion of the vehicle. But on this model here, it's even more of a complex design challenge because of the detailed engine compartment and the engine hatch. Now, in the past, the way I've usually done is these sections here I make pivot so that they could hinge out of the way to get access to the top deck area. On this model here, I went ahead and used a different design solution. Rather than utilizing the rotation method, I went ahead and made these units completely come apart, and this is done via magnets. To do the modification, I went ahead and bored out these two sections here of the aluminum deeper compared to the stock original offering. I then compacted the area with epoxy and entombed in there a magnet. On the elbows, I went ahead and drilled them out as well and added a cluster of small magnets, which will then click directly into place. The magnets are a very easy solution because they are in place. They're held on in a nice sturdy manner, but are also easily removed. Just a little tug, the pieces pop right out. This was done to both of the units. From here, I can now get them into primer and then mount them on. With the fifel system out of the way, the last of the details that really need to be mounted to this section of the tank are the two S-mine grenade canisters. Now, the S-mines I mentioned in the last video, and these were mounted primarily on the top deck area of the tank. However, on the Tiger 1, there were also two more positioned on the rear corner sections. In the last video, I described that the two corner ones were going to be added later on because of some other fittings that need to be added. And the fittings are what's found on these two sections that we have here. Now, just like with the ones in the last video, these two units here are the ones that are found on the EastCoastArmory.com product line and are supplied with the set. The sets come with the two units in the back, as well as the other remaining units that are mounted on the front portion and the middle section of the vehicle. Now, the components that we have here are fully assembled, but the kit ones do need to be assembled to the point that we see here in this video. All the components are supplied, however, with the set. Now, the units are left and right hand specific because they need to go on the rear corner areas of the vehicle. Here you can see the units up close. Here we have the canister and the base, which are identical to the ones found on the remainder of the vehicle. The real difference has to do with the way they're strapped on. We have here a long bracket that the fasteners would mount directly onto, and then on the opposite side here there is a angular plate with another bracket. Now, in the real vehicle, the two support brackets here and here would be welded directly to the side portion of the vehicle, and then everything would then fasten to the sections via bolts. You can see the fasteners found on the top portion here for both detail and actually for structure. This is how the unit is affixed on. And then the two other holes that we have here are going to be used for two longer fasteners, which are actually going to connect into the tank's armor plate, which will give you, again, the detail but also the strength required to have these pieces mounted on. Now, they are a right and left hand specific unit. They are opposites and mirror images of each other. And from here, they're going to get a quick shot of primer, and then from there, installation will be done. And here are the fifel canisters, as well as the S-mines now mounted to the model. Let's go ahead and get closer in to see exactly what's going on over here. Starting with the S-mine canister, here you can see how it mounts to the rear section of the vehicle. Now, it is an exact mirror image on the opposite side of the tank. Now, the way it mounts on this side here, like I was alluding to before, is with that rectangular plate that would be welded to the real vehicle, and then the two fasteners here are what mount the bracket to the piece itself. Now, the two fasteners we have here are actually what's used to mount the whole assembly to the actual side of the vehicle. The weld beads that you see here are sculpted and are primarily there for detail purposes only. And from behind you can see how the other strap mounts to the vehicle. This one here is just welded directly in place. And again, on the model here, it's actually held on with a metal pin that goes into the aluminum, giving the piece some much needed strength. Since these pieces are located on the corners here, they are more susceptible of getting snagged compared to the ones on the top deck. So extra rigidity was needed to the mounting of these pieces here. Now, like I stated earlier, as well as in a previous video, the only thing that's going to be added to the S-mines now to finish them off are their firing electrode cables, which are going to be added towards the end of the build, just shortly before the completion. More information on that, of course, is to follow in an upcoming video. Moving from the S-mine now brings us to the fifel canister. The canisters are installed out of box with two countersunk fasteners that are located on the inside portion here of the hull. However, on the exterior, we do have some detail fittings. These two straps that we have here are present on the real Tiger 1 and are what are used to actually secure the top portion of the fifel to the rear of the vehicle. It gives it extra support compared to the standard mounts that are found on the rear hull section of the vehicle. Now, these two sections here are not supplied with the Armortek kit and were scratch built by myself. The materials are strips of steel, some plastruct square, as well as some fasteners. From the straps, this now brings us to the elbows and the tubes. Now, the tubes that we have here are the stock original units, and I did mention them in an earlier video. As a quick recap, these are supplied with the Armortek kit and are 3D printed. The printings are a very nice quality, and the tubes have their correct shape and detail to them. Notice they are a angular type surface that has a helix type rotation to them. This is as per the real vehicle, and it is very good that Armortek included this with their set. Of all of the fifel systems that I have seen on model tanks, these ones here are one of the best renditions of this component. Now, with the way the pieces are printed, they are semi-solid on the inside in that you have several sections of 3D print that act as internal columns. In order to mount on to the fittings as well as also to the elbows, you need to remove and bore out these center sections. This is done with quick work via a Dremel with one of those razor type cutting stones, and you could just go inside and bore out the unneeded material till you get the appropriate fit that we have here. Now, also required was a little bit of hand fitting on one or two of the tubes. Just a slight bit of material was needed to be removed from one of the sections in order to have the piece fit in a more streamlined manner compared to the way it was left stock. However, this is a good thing in that the pieces are actually slightly longer compared to where they need to be, because it's always better to remove material as opposed to having the pieces be too short, and with something like this, you're basically up the creek without a paddle. The one critique that I do have on these sections here is that the material is nicely detailed and rendered. However, because of the type of vehicle that this is, being radio controlled, if you do need to get access to the interior, the rigid media that's used for the prints could be a little bit better in that rather than being solid and rigid like these ones here, if the pieces were printed in some kind of a flexible material, perhaps this would have been a little bit more ideal for the use of removal once the model is fully built and painted. However, having said that, I was able to get the pieces to disengage, which I'll go over in a second. Moving further back now brings us to the retention strap. Now, these are not the kit originals. The kit original straps were just very plain pieces of laser cut steel that have two holes in them, and they mount in a very similar way. However, on the real Tiger 1, these pieces were a little bit more in depth compared to the way they are rendered on most of the models that are on the market. Let me simply unbolt this piece here, and you'll see exactly what I'm referring to. You'll notice that the strap does have a small little block that on the real one would be welded. On this model here, it's actually soldered on. Just like what was mentioned in an earlier video when I was referring to the rear engine hatch, there is a small little raised section like this one here found on the bottom mount of the fifel tubes. This little lump here, basically what it does is it compresses and keeps everything in place and prevents them from wandering around. Only on the one that's found on the strap found on the engine hatch, it's actually in reverse, which I go over again more in depth in that other video. However, these two pieces here were fabricated out of strips of brass and then soldered together. This gives excellent detailing, as well as the material being brass. They are nice and strong and plenty durable enough for the application at hand. Now, from the strap takes us to the air intake. This is the Armortek kit supplied unit and was literally used with no mods being necessary. Now, like I showcased before, the elbows are actually held on via magnets and are designed to be disengaged. To do the disengaging process, it's done with, first you have to take off the brass straps. And of course you don't want to lose any of the little bits of hardware, as this can easily be done. Now, once the straps are removed, it's then time to start removal of the tubes. Now, the tubes are again held onto their elbows, and the elbows are connected with magnets, so no other tools are required in order to remove them. The way they get removed is you just pivot them out of the way, and then they should just disengage. We first start, by the way, with the inner tubes here, the ones with the air intakes. The pieces just simply slip off, like so. Once the units have been slipped off, it is then time to take off the last two. You just, again, pivot out of the way. And once the last unit is removed, you now have access to the engine. Now, although this does seem a bit convoluted, you have to keep in mind this is actually very similar to the real Tiger one, which was, again, one of the reasons why the fifel systems were something that were, A, not very popular, and B, were something that were phased out relatively earlier on during the Tiger one's production run. Now, from witnessing the disengagement process, you could see why, if the tubes were made from a softer, more flexible material, the disengagement and re-engagement process would go by a little bit easier. However, having said that, the stock rigid units are more than capable enough of doing the same job. And doing the process in reverse is as simple as lowering the engine hatch and just undoing the process that we just did. Now, we first start with the fifel tube, which connects the air intake to the top portion of the fifel canister. You slide it onto the intake first, and then the piece should just wiggle into place until the magnet locks it in. Do the same thing to the opposite side. Once the top units are connected, it's then time to connect the lower tubes. Now, lower tubes are a little bit trickier to put in because you have to snake them around the top elbow and around this section here of the exhaust grill. Or I should say the exhaust heat shield. These get put on as followed. Hopefully with this camera angle you get a better idea. So it just clears the flange piece. Once clear, the piece then goes into its indexing hole on the fifel canister, and then the tube just lays across and slides in to its mount right here on the engine hatch. Now let me move the camera so you get a better idea of what I was referring to on this fifel canister that we have here. Okay, now let's install the last tube. Again, you want to slide this section over here in between this little gap on the heat shield, to which then you could then pivot it into its indexing hole in the fifel canister, and then just drop the tube directly in place. Once the tubes are in place, it's then time to add the straps. And the way the straps go on is that we have a little block here, and this little block goes over the tube that's on the air intake. Right, or I should say the one over the air intake ductwork that we have here. This just slides on. And then the nuts just get threaded in place and hold everything together. Now you don't want to over torque down on these nuts here. You just, again, just a little bit of hand tightening is all that's required just to keep the unit in place. Same thing with the one on the opposite side. Now it's really easy not to screw up which way the orientation goes, because if you try to mount it the other way, you're going to make contact with this tube over here and it's not going to fit on right. So there's really only one way these pieces can get installed. Once the pieces are then threaded on, the reinstallation process is now fully complete. While on the engine deck, another quick little detailing that was fitted are the cover caps. Now these are the stock Armortek units, and no mods were made to them whatsoever. They just get threaded directly into their appropriate locations. Like I said before, when I reviewed these pieces, this is a very nice addition to the Armortek kit, and is one in the past that I would have to fabricate out of resin. With these components now kit supplied, it's one less thing that needs to be acquired by the builder. The units simply just thread directly in place, and once on, you don't have to worry about them. Now, as a quick recap, the units directly underneath these sections over here are actually the tubes in which you refill the tank's smoke system, which of course I've talked in more depth in previous videos. With these additions now added, the model has just taken a significant jump since the last video update. Now, of course, the next area of focus will be the gun barrel and the mantlet, and those additions and modifications will be discussed in more detail in the next video update. However, the vehicle is starting to look like a Tiger 1, and it shouldn't be too long before this guy heads off into painting and completion. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek radio-controlled early production German Tiger 1. If you are new to this channel, be sure to subscribe, which is the best way to keep in the loop of new posted content from project update videos like this one here, along with the smaller scale model showcase videos when they get posted. In addition to that, you could also swing by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this particular build that have been posted since project start, along with the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been posted on the ECA channel. Finally, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com, where there are more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching.